In 1956, a brand new Cessna 172 rolled off the production line in Wichita, Kansas. Its price tag, $8,995. Adjusted for inflation, that's roughly $100,000 in today's money. A perfectly reasonable investment for a revolutionary aircraft that would change flight training forever. Here's what defies all logic. That exact same airplane, the one built nearly 7 decades ago, is still flying students today. Right now, at flight schools across America, aspiring pilots are strapping into aircraft older than their grandparents. Machines with engines designed in the 1950s. Airframes that have logged tens of thousands of hours. Instruments that belong in museums. Meanwhile, a brand new Cessna 172 costs over $450,000. That's not a typo. The same basic design, the same fundamental aircraft, now commands nearly 5 times its inflation-adjusted original price. And flight schools keep buying the old ones anyway. This isn't nostalgia. It isn't stubbornness. It's survival. Because hidden beneath this seemingly absurd reality lies a perfect storm of economic catastrophe, legal warfare, and a training crisis that threatens the entire aviation industry. The reason flight schools still fly 50-year-old Cessnas reveals something far more troubling about how we train the pilots who will carry billions of passengers into the future. Let's talk numbers. A well-maintained 1970s Cessna 172 sells for roughly $60,000 to $90,000. Reasonable for a working aircraft. Now here's where the math stops making sense. A brand new Cessna 172S, fresh from the Textron factory, costs between $450,000 and $500,000. That's not a premium. That's a 5 to 7 times price multiplier for essentially the same airplane. Think about what that means for flight schools. The average flight school operates on razor-thin margins. They charge students $150 to $200 per hour for aircraft rental. That rate barely covers fuel, maintenance, insurance, and instructor pay when flying older aircraft. To make a new $450,000 airplane financially viable, schools would need to charge $300 or more per hour. Most already struggle to fill seats at current prices. But here's the brutal reality hiding behind those hourly rates. Becoming an airline pilot now costs between $75,000 and $110,000 in total training expenses. That's before housing, transportation, or the years spent building flight hours at poverty wages. Boeing projects the aviation industry will need 674,000 new pilots globally through 2043. North America alone requires 127,000. We desperately need more pilots, yet we've made becoming one financially impossible for most Americans. Now here's what nobody tells you about those aging training fleets. They're actually appreciating in value. During the pilot shortage surge of 2018 to 2023, something unprecedented happened. Cessna 172S, built between 1968 and 1976, increased in value by 20% in just a few months. Flight schools discovered their supposedly depreciating assets were becoming investments. The older the airplane, the more valuable it became. This creates a paradox that defies conventional economics. New aircraft are too expensive to buy. Old aircraft are too valuable to replace. And student pilots are caught in the middle, paying premium prices to fly machines their grandparents could have trained in. The original 1956 Cessna 172 cost $8,995. Adjusted for inflation, that's approximately $100,000 in today's dollars. A reasonable investment for a revolutionary aircraft. Yet somehow, that same basic design now commands nearly $500,000. The astronomical prices didn't happen by accident. To understand why a 1956 design now costs what a house costs, we need to travel back to a decade when the entire general aviation industry nearly ceased to exist. In 1978, American manufacturers produced 18,000 general aviation aircraft. The industry was booming. Cessna alone couldn't build airplanes fast enough to meet demand. Then something catastrophic happened. By 1994, that number had collapsed to just 928 aircraft, a 95% freefall. Over 100,000 aerospace workers lost their jobs. Factories went silent. The cause wasn't foreign competition. It wasn't lack of demand. It was lawsuits. Here's what made the crisis so devastating. General aviation manufacturers had built their aircraft too well. Cessna 172s, designed in the 1950s, were still flying perfectly in the 1980s. Some had logged 40 years of continuous service, but every flight represented potential liability exposure. Manufacturers could be sued for accidents involving aircraft they'd built decades earlier, regardless of maintenance history, pilot error, or mechanical wear. The legal assault was relentless. Beech Aircraft defended 203 lawsuits in just 3 years, spending an average of $530,000 per case. The National Transportation Safety Board investigated every single crash. Their finding: not one accident was attributable to manufacturing defects. Most were pilot error. Didn't matter. The lawsuits kept coming. Then came the announcement that shook aviation to its core. In 1986, Cessna chairman Russell Meyer declared the unthinkable: complete shutdown of all single-engine piston aircraft production. The most successful aircraft manufacturer in history stopped building its most iconic product. Meyer's testimony to Congress was damning. Liability insurance alone added $40,000 to $70,000 to every airplane's cost. On aircraft selling for $85,000, insurance represented half the price. Piper filed for bankruptcy in 1991. Beech abandoned most piston aircraft entirely. The industry that had trained generations of pilots was dying. Salvation came on August 17, 1994. President Clinton signed the General Aviation Revitalization Act, granting manufacturers immunity from lawsuits involving aircraft older than 18 years. Russell Meyer kept his promise. Cessna resumed 172 production in 1996. But here's what Gara couldn't restore. A decade of manufacturing expertise had scattered. Supply chains had collapsed. Specialized tooling had disappeared. When production resumed, Cessna essentially rebuilt its capabilities from scratch. The aircraft that emerged was fundamentally identical to its 1986 predecessor. The price was not. The act saved general aviation from extinction. It also locked in a permanent problem that flight schools still struggle with 30 years later. Here's what might surprise you. Those 50-year-old aircraft aren't just economically necessary. They're genuinely safe. The FAA mandates rigorous inspections every 100 flight hours and comprehensive annual examinations for every aircraft, regardless of age. A 1972 Cessna 172 that passes inspection is legally identical in airworthiness to one built yesterday. The maintenance standards are unforgiving. No exceptions, no shortcuts. The numbers prove it works. The Cessna 172's fatal accident rate stands at 0.56 per 100,000 flight hours. The general aviation average hovers between 1.2 and 1.4. The Skyhawk is literally twice as safe as typical light aircraft. Its forgiving flight characteristics, predictable stall behavior, and stable handling have protected student pilots for 7 decades. But surely modern alternatives should have replaced it by now. They haven't. The Diamond DA-40 offers composite construction, glass cockpits, and superior fuel efficiency. The Cirrus SR-20 comes equipped with a whole aircraft parachute system. Both represent genuine engineering achievements. Both have failed to displace the 172 from training dominance. The reasons are brutally practical. Advanced aircraft carry higher acquisition costs and demand expensive proprietary parts. Their sophisticated systems create steeper learning curves that extend training timelines. Flight schools charging $300 per hour for modern trainers struggle to fill seats, while competitors offer 172s at half that rate. The result is staggering market concentration. More than 50% of flight schools worldwide still use the Skyhawk as their primary trainer. Over 40,000 Cessna 172s remain in active service globally. No other aircraft comes close. Now here's where the story takes a troubling turn. The pilot shortage is projected to peak around 2026, with a workforce gap of 24,000 pilots in America alone. Airlines are offering signing bonuses exceeding $150,000 and first-year salaries approaching 6 figures. Yet training capacity has nearly reached its limit. Flight schools face instructor shortages, aging fleets they cannot afford to replace, and training costs that deter the next generation of aviators. The industry desperately needs more pilots. The aircraft to train them adequately simply don't exist in sufficient numbers at prices schools can afford. Modern alternatives remain economically irrelevant, and the vintage workhorses keeping aviation alive grow older every year. The Cessna 172 wasn't designed to fly for 7 decades. It wasn't built to carry this burden, yet somehow it endures. The Cessna 172. Skyhawk has outlasted every competitor that tried to replace it. It has survived a decade when its own manufacturer refused to build it. It has trained more pilots than any aircraft in history, and it's still training them today, one creaky airframe at a time. This isn't a story about aviation's failure to innovate. It's a story about what happens when economics, liability, and regulation collide to create an impossible market. Flight schools aren't flying 50-year-old aircraft because they're nostalgic. They're flying them because the alternative is not flying at all. The pilot shortage will not be solved by brilliant new aircraft designs. It will be solved the same way it's been solved for 7 decades, by student pilots climbing into worn leather seats, gripping control yokes their instructors once held, and learning to fly in machines that somehow keep defying the laws of economics and time. The most produced aircraft in history, the safest trainer ever built, still flying, still teaching, still absolutely essential. The next time you board a commercial flight, remember, your pilot almost certainly learned to fly in an aircraft older than you are. And that's not a problem. That's a miracle. Subscribe, because the story of how we train the pilots of tomorrow is just beginning.